Hey guys, I'm with Carlos Delora, pro pickleball player and co-founder of The Lab here in Austin, Texas, one of the coolest facilities that I've ever played at. And today we're going to be going over our 2024 seasons and all the lessons that we've learned and just recap all the concepts that have been newly introduced to the sport. So the first one that I want to talk about is the differences in strategy from this year compared to last year. I think one of the biggest differences has got to be the development of the right side player is not only the setup person or the beta that's just a consistent making balls type of guy, but also a alpha in certain scenarios. It depends on the pattern. And we've seen certain players like Alshon, Tardio, even Dylan Frazier at points. They all not only stay in their box, but they get aggressive based off of some patterns. Like, what have you seen as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You know, like you said, Alshon, Tardio, like they're showing new ways where you can really have some good offense, you know, from the right side, especially, you know, kind of taking some backhands early out of the air. I think one of those things have been like all the paddles are getting better, more power, but also just taking space away from your opponent, right? If I'm leaning in with a backhand, even though it might be coming to my partner's forehand, I can still take it a little bit earlier and catch you off guard. So yeah, it's been really fun to watch as a right side guy. Myself, you know, anytime that I see a good right side guy, you know, I try to learn, you know, something. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And it's I mean, you're a right side guy. I'm a right side guy. I'm a lefty. You're a righty. It's the same pattern still. Like the person in front of us is going to be the left side guy, and they have to not only cover line, body, but also middle. So It's easier. I'd say sometimes it's easier for you as the right side guy to speed up because you have that cross body to the middle that, you know, the person on the left, it's a bit more difficult with that backhand.
Sure.
So I think, and also another change that I've seen is honestly just the right side player hitting a lot more forehands.
Yeah.
As in like Gabe's a great example. He almost never hits a backhand dink unless it's a backhand volley.
Yeah.
And so because whenever they're hitting a dink, he always runs around it because he has enough time. Thomas Wilson's another example of that. But I think probably 2 years ago or so, for example, like Colin, he'd actually let the ball bounce and hit a backhand, compared to now, a lot of people would let the ball bounce and still hit a roll forehand, just because it's easier to get topspin, it's easier to get shape, and it's also easier to speed up when you're hitting that ball as a forehand right here.
For sure, yeah. And keep your opponents guessing too, like holding the ball, and then all of a sudden you have different angles that you're more comfortable with a forehand, put a little more shape than just kind of a defensive, you know, slice back in or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And then another thing on the point of strategy is I've seen a lot more new players into the sport, specifically coming from tennis, have a lot more rolls and utilizing their 2E backhands.
For sure.
A lot of the dead dinks now that would typically just get pushed back are now getting rolled. And I mean, I think obviously that's not only to put pressure, but to show that you can also speed up off of a roll. If you're hitting a slice dink like the way we were, you know, even last year, every single ball, then you're telling your opponent that you can't speed up that slice dink. Now, every single ball, for example, when you're rolling your forehand cross court, every single time you roll it, it looks like a speed up.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I always like to compare, you know, like for people coming from tennis, like this is our baseline points in pickleball. Like our tennis baseline is like the kitchen in pickleball. Like it's kind of where all the points are taking place. So you're almost treating that as like a baseline tennis rally, like grinding people down or you know, start. You can really dictate points better with rolling the ball rather than just kind of staying passive and chipping. You're almost taking the point into your terms, you know, just showing a little more control and getting some real estate, you know, up the kitchen line.
Yeah, for sure. And like, even for example, like Kwang, I don't believe has a forehand cup dink. Every single ball he runs around and rolls it. He's always applying offense. And that's a scary player to play against. And this year we've seen a lot more players develop that type of, I'd say, strategy where you have enough time typically to run around it and still get behind it with some topspin rather than just being lazy and just cup dinking everything that's away from your body.
For sure. Yeah, and kind of to your point, like it might seem silly at times, like, oh, they're stepping off the line quite a bit, but if I need to do that to then get more more behind my ball. It's shown to be worth it, you know.
Mm-hmm. And so have you seen a lot more players? I mean, this year compared to last year, have you seen a lot more players take more balls out of the air or let more balls bounce?
I mean, I think, you know, you're always going to want to take the ball out of the air if you can, right? Without kind of overstretching yourself. But I feel like, you know, now players just have more options. Like, yeah, if I can flick it out of the air, great. But if not, I know that I also have a pretty aggressive shot if I stay patient and let it bounce. So, I mean, it's not going to get to the point where everyone's just, you know, rolling dinks and no one's taking it out of the air. Like, it's always going to be a thing, right? The point of rolling the dinks is to then get that ball out of the air to flick. But I think you're going to see more awareness in players of like, you know, I don't really need to overstretch myself as much because then I can just let it bounce and then still produce some offense.
Yeah, good point. So this year there was a lot of contention around poppy paddles. And now it seems like last year there were control, spin-oriented paddles, and now it's all power paddles. If you're not using a power paddle, then you're at a disadvantage. How do you think that affected the game this year, and where do you see it headed, say, for next year?
Yeah, selfishly, I honestly have more fun when the game is slower. You know, but yeah, you have seen a lot of paddles just become like so poppy, and you know, if they're still legal, then you can't really complain about it. So, I think we'll continue to see that trend until like more regulations are probably made. But yeah, it's, you know, I on the pro level, for example, I see the biggest disadvantage of not having a pod paddle in counters or fast hands exchanges, you know? Like,
yes. Yeah.
And then also like when it gets to the point where like someone's on their back foot and they can just speed up a ball that you shouldn't speed up and it works, you're like, well, that's not fair. But you know, that'd be a different conversation. But you know, obviously, like there are a lot of poppy paddles out there, and technology is getting so good where like I feel like everyone needs to come out with a poppy paddle. For it to be a level playing field.
For sure. And I think poppy paddles basically created the strategy of just serve, return, drive. Like 1, 2, 3s are so much more important now that poppy paddles are in the game. I think last year people were just putting their serves in the court or just trying to get their returns deep and not really driving as many thirds unless it was a short and high ball. Now it's like your serve is a weapon. You're going for your serve, especially since it compounds with that heavier paddle. And then you're going for that third as well. Even if you're on your back foot, you can still rip a ball and expect it to dip and go in.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty interesting strategy, as well as, you know, if you have a partner that's a lefty or that can just poach in general, then that creates a lot more opportunities to end points quicker. And so I think I've seen a lot more exchanges end in the 1, 2, 3 range than I'd say last year.
Yeah.
Now let's talk more on the business side of things. You obviously being the co-founder of the lab, you're in a pretty interesting spot, owning a facility. How do you think facilities have changed this year compared to last year?
Yeah, especially in the Austin area, you're seeing a lot of indoor places opening up. Now it's almost like unheard of someone opening up like an outdoor pickleball place, right? It's really exciting. You know, we have a different business model than most facilities. We only have one court, so our goal was just to make it the most special court possible. But yeah, it's great to see other facilities opening up. I really think, you know, the you know, supply demand kind of equation still there where people can open up facilities, but I think it's going to get to the point where like what stands out your facility compared to others, right? If there's like a sense of community or good programming or, you know, and I think it's really easy to tell, you know, when a pickleball facility opens up, like if it was developed by pickleball players or not. You know, I think that's going to be a really big factor in surviving kind of the pickleball facility market.
That's actually a really good point. A lot of the facilities I've seen that do more poor of a job are created by people who are a little, not outdated, but are a little disconnected from what's going on in pickleball. I'm not saying you need to know every pro player, but honestly, I think there's a correlation between knowing every pro player and what's going on in pickleball in general and having a better facility.
For sure. Yeah, it's just small details, but like at the end, they all add up, right? Like putting yourself in the shoes of like, what do I like in a facility, or where have I had a good experience? And like, oh, the walls were dark, I can actually see the ball, or like I have good spacing between, you know, the baseline and the fence. Like the noise is huge for us. Like we really put big emphasis on like sound panels and sound blankets, because like, let's be honest, pickleball is super annoyingly loud sport, and if that's going to hinder your experience somewhere, then it's not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, in a few facilities this year, I've actually seen instead of there's basically these windscreens that also act as sound barriers.
Yeah.
So when they back up to neighborhoods, you can install these windscreens and sound barriers. So it basically lowers the decibel level to the tennis type decibel level. That's something that I've seen this year. That's a pretty cool technology that I think should be adopted in most places.
For sure.
Another thing this year that we saw a lot more frequently was not the introduction, but just more international tournaments. I mean, even last weekend, there was one in either China or Vietnam, I forgot. And going into 2025, we're going to have a lot more tours internationally, as well as more tour stops with the current U.S. tours. How did you see international pickleball grow this year?
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about that aspect too. Like, obviously, we've seen so many talented players just in the U.S. or like, you know, or foreign players but live in the U.S. and we think like that's it, you know. But when you start tapping into like other countries that are like getting addicted to pickleball, just like how we have been the last few years, is like, I mean, you're gonna see the talent just go up quite a bit. You know, I'm from Peru, so I was super excited to see like the Pickleball World Cup happen in Peru. I was a little bummed I wasn't able to play it, but hopefully next year. But just different events like that, anything that's growing the game, I think it's amazing, and that's just going to help the overall level of play.
Yes, and we've seen players from like Freddie Powell from the UK, Amelia Schmidt from Australia, and Armand from India. They all come to the U.S. now to train or not live because the competition is better in the U.S.
Yeah.
And it also gives them, you know, if you're the best one in your country, then you have to go overseas to get better.
For sure.
And I think that's a pretty unique opportunity now because, you know, I think before this year, you were just training in your country and you were the best one. Now they're actually reaching out to the best players and trying to get games with them, even if that involves going across the pond.
Yeah, and, you know, I think as an avid pickleball player and like just a fan of the sport, and I can talk about it all day. I have a pickleball business. I work for a pickleball brand. We all want it to be in the Olympics. Like that's honestly the dream for me, is like to see in the Olympics, and that's we're taking the right steps, you know, in trying to grow the game, not just in the US, but everywhere else.
Well, that wraps up our 2024 recap. Drop a comment down below if we missed anything. And as always, thank you for Carlos for having us here at the lab, and I'll see y'all next week.
Cut. MC.
Money.